So, we promised we would talk about masking. First, let's define what that is in the context of this discussion.
Let's step back. So we got here because last time we were talking about how we have this explosion of middle-aged women claiming neurodivergent, behaviors, this reinvention, coming across as gurus, kind of helping potentially guide other people through the coming into enlightenment into the neurodivergent space. And that kind of got us down a path of trying to understand that. Did I characterize that pretty well?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also important right out of the gate that we say, okay, actual neurodivergence exists.
Yes.
So we are not saying that every single person that claims neurodivergence is lying or mentally ill or whatever else. So we'll just throw that out right out of the gate.
Well, and that's incredibly important because, and again, neurodivergence, like it's interesting. It's what'd you call it? It's a fun term for, I'm in a way, it's like I'm special. I'm not typical. I'm unique. I'm set aside. In your identity protective systems, which you describe, it's this uniqueness, the enlightened, if you will. Now, what typically falls under what starts to fall under the neurodivergent umbrella, and this is something I actually just recently wrote about. So you have things like autism and ADHD. Those are two classic ones that get in there. But people have added so many others. Everything from, there's this neurodivergent umbrella, and I'll just go through it. Autism, plurality, dyslexia, bipolar, ADHD, CPTSD, hearing voices, Alzheimer's, Tourette's, FASD, acquired brain injuries, synesthesia, I got that one wrong, DID and OSDD, I don't even know what those are, cerebral palsy, right? Personality disorders, giftedness, plurality, because plurality has to be on there twice, OCD, anxiety, stuttering. It's such a broad umbrella that the term neurodivergent really, I don't even know how to categorize it, but it's the umbrella is so big, I don't even know what neurotypical is anymore.
So we had talked about this part of it last week or 2 weeks ago when we were live last time. And we had come to the conclusion that by expanding it as much as we have crowded out people who need actual accommodations, people who have actual disability, people who have now had to rephrase, quote unquote, what's wrong with them, because they need resources, they need help, but they can't, it's not enough to say I have an autistic child or I am autistic and I need accommodation, because now I have to add additional terms to it. I'm profoundly autistic. Although to be fair, if you're profoundly autistic, you probably can't tell somebody that.
Correct. And then, or as one of the fellows on Substack, desperately disabled adult. Right. So the way I characterize it, so for those listening, I've recently published on the kind of the topic of the conversation, masking as neurodivergent, and to show just how difficult this conversation is. So under that umbrella, I say all of these variables make this both difficult to critique without being accused of punching down, and impossible to pin a definition where quirky personality sits next to Down syndrome, stuttering, giftedness, and anxiety. It's so broad as to include anyone and claims enough legit disabilities to create a minefield for analysis. So so then what we did is we started to kind of pick it apart from there. But this is where it's such a perfect cover. And this is going back to let's just put it out there. As you said, in neurodivergency, no word that I listed there doesn't exist, right? Yes, there are acquired brain injuries. Yes, there is psychosis. Yes, there are intellectual disabilities. Yes, there is stuttering. Yes, there is autism. Yes, there is ADHD. And some of these require obviously, they all require dramatically different types and conditions of care, different types of accommodations as appropriate, different, all the different elements that need to go into it to treat neurodivergence. But the problem is, with it being so broad, it actually allows people to mask as neurodivergent.
So let's stop there for a second, though, because part of the big debate that we've seen going on Substack is that masking is hiding your neurodivergence. And we saw that there was a chat that we're both in where someone was talking about having to mask, having to filter, and that they prefer, being deliberate with the they here, that they prefer to have quote unquote no filter. And I noticed that you would responded to that and basically said, no, we all filter because that is the price of living in a society. There are such things as social graces. And I'm not advocating lying or whatever, but we can't just all run around saying whatever pops into our heads, because humans are mean.
Well, so this is Hannah Spear, who writes a lot on narcissism, specifically that's manifestation in women. Wrote a post a couple days ago. The term masking is spreading like a bad rash. Let's call it what it actually is: emotional regulation necessary for adulting. If you've learned to mask your emotions, congratulations, you are no longer 14 years old. You're just a properly socialized adult. The people pushing this term desperately want to be shoehorned into a mental health label to gain the social status attached without fulfilling the criteria for it. Now, I would disagree slightly in that, it's 100% that masking, we call it code switching in the real world, right? You know that you can't just, you know that how you act around your boys in the woods is not how you act around the old ladies at church. Like, pretty obvious the way those things don't cross as cleanly as we might think, right? Doesn't mean you have to pretend to be a different person, but code switching is absolutely an essential skill. But also, this is where it got interesting, is the more I found, the more, like one of the statistics that I came across, somebody had used it, 1 in 3 women were misdiagnosed as having a personality pathology, a cluster B type diagnosis, before getting their proper autism diagnosis. And I had pointed out it's not a misdiagnosis at all, because it takes, personality disorders are much more strenuously diagnosed, whereas I could go right now online and in about 30 minutes have an autism diagnosis. So which one took the effort? Now, and this is what's interesting, is because we've created this beautiful umbrella that's all inclusive, and we've started to celebrate neurodiversity, is like diversity, inclusion, and equality. You've got this thing where you're the diverse voice now. You're the one that people want to add in because you're not just the typical average whatever. Well, so that's intoxicating. You're special. You're set aside. You're important. But it's also really easy to get that diagnosis. It also carries all of this status that a personality pathology doesn't carry. Like, yes, we don't like narcissists. Yes, we don't like bipolar. Yes, we don't like histrionic, right? We don't like antisocial. Like, so these are things that are important, but they're masking. They're saying, I don't want to be those negatives, so I'm going to take this mask and blame it on autism, and that allows me to perform under that guise, which excuses my inability to mask, like Hannah discussed, as healthy emotional regulation.
Is it an ability, though?
Is masking an ability?
No, I'm saying if I put the mask on and I say, okay, I don't like that I was called a borderline personality, for instance. I don't like that I was called a histrionic personality or what have you. So I shop around for therapists or doctors or what have you until I get the autism diagnosis in my late 40s, 50s, whatever. And now you say this mask allows me to hide my inability to emotionally regulate. But is it inability or is it choice? Like, at what point does accountability?
Okay, this is right. Well, that was something that, this is when we wrote, let me jump to it quick. Personality, was it personality pathology?
True neurodivergence.
True neurodivergence, thank you. I'm trying to get your quote right. So it's interesting. I've been writing about this more often than I'd like because it's become such an interesting study in this thing. But basically, okay, here we go. The challenge is that the person's identity is tied to the group. This is your concluding sentence. So the only way they will change, let go, or work on said quirk, or in this case, difficulty, right, or to grow at all, is if there's a group that's more attractive than the current, that's willing to offer them membership if they leave their current, or more rarely, they do the work to break out of their patterns. So right now they have one where they have been identified as a social problem, right? It is a social pathology. The cluster B groupings, right? Borderline, histrionic, antisocial, and narcissistic. Those nobody likes hanging around those. That's the devouring mother, the negative archetype in the feminine. The masculine side is the dark triad. That's the Machiavellianism, the sociological and pathological, right? I believe there's narcissistic in there as well. But the point is, okay, is it an inability, or is it in a way that becomes a nuance, because by masking as neurodivergent, they are able to now claim disability and not have to do the work to actually mature.
But the obvious answer to that is, how can it be, and this is something we touched on last time, how can it be simultaneously a disability and yet a superpower that does not, because wasn't it something you mentioned in a recent piece that Harvard had shut down something because activists had said there's nothing wrong with autistic people, it's not a disability, it's so research to quote unquote cure it or help it or provide assistance is unnecessary.
Well, and so this is where, okay, this is the diagnostic blow, right? Okay, autism used to exist as, basically mild and profound levels, was now called levels 2 and levels 3. So mild autism was you needed help, and level 3 was you cannot function. Level 3 is like the nonverbal smearing poop. Like these are people who need 24-hour-a-day care. These are ones who will walk out into a street and get killed because they're not there. That is an absolute disability. But
that
when we added
their
in,
fault, and they do not lose their personhood. I also want to put that in there.
100%. And this isn't the same way, Down syndrome kid, right? Like, yeah, like that doesn't deny them their rights to exist. However, it also means that we recognize that they don't have the same equivalent capability to function the way. So that is like truly neurodivergent in that sense, right? But then we added Asperger's. Now Asperger's it has different, again, little layers on there. I know quite a few people. I work in engineering. Of course, I know quite a few people who are on the spectrum and Asperger's, right? They like things literally. They're very chop, 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 chop. But there is a differentiation between level 1 and level 2. Level 2 is very rigid, very hard to get them. It's like Rain Man, right? Rain Man is a level 2 autist. Versus a quirky personality. But when you actually look at the statistics and you see the growth of autism over time, you find that it's driven almost exclusively by level 1, Asperger's. We aren't seeing an increase of level 2 and 3. In fact, one of the graphs, I was trying to find it before this conversation, has actually shown a slight decrease in level 2 and level 3 autism as people have figured out or things have changed. But level 1 has just ballooned. So from 1 in 300 to 1 in 33, that's level 1 autism. That's quirky personalities. That's why I wrote personality or pathology, because we have collapsed the beautiful diversity of like the Myers-Briggs 16 different type of archetypes into some facsimile of typical, well, everyone's trying to claim special status, giftedness, whatever. And so that's the group I think that's the most what's the term? vulnerable to the cluster B, as well as the ones that are also the ones that you can actually manage that level 1 autism in that sense. Sorry, I didn't mean to go off too long on that one.
No, I'm actually putting a link up to that personality versus pathology essay for folks. I'm trying to keep up with the essays that we're referencing so people can kind of read through it and follow this now months-long discussion that we've had going as we explore all these topics. And it's almost like there's so many layers that you can very easily get into the weeds. And it's very easy for, and it has happened, it is happening, where people who fit one or more of the categories that we're talking about find that to be an attack on their human worth. And that goes back to the identity protective systems that we were talking about. But now we're talking about layers of masking, where you're talking about code switching. That is what a normal, healthy human being does when they understand that the world does not revolve around them and how they choose to be. It happens when you have a healthy human being that wants to be able to healthily connect with other humans. And so there are things that even if I think them, I would not say them to you. And quite frankly, you're one of the people in my life that I could say a lot of stuff to.
Well, we both know there's a in our sidebar conversations, there's a perception I have on a political hot topic that I can be very direct with you on, that you'll never see me, post, unless I'm absolutely trolling somebody. But yeah, it's just one of those things like, you have these filters. I mean, and again, I come from the Army, right? So what was one of the more interesting things is you'd have the group of artillerymen, and my wife would come in at the end of the day to pick me up. This was back when we were first married and we only had one car, and she was I was about to deploy, so we didn't want to buy a second one. But anyway, they'd see her come in, they'd be like, hey, Lieutenant Woodenberg's wife is here, and all of a sudden, all up and down, the entire tone would change and the language cleaned up, and it wasn't because we're being problematic, but it was the respect of the woman entering the room that caused them to, a little less rough and tumble, a little less assholery amongst men. But it was that proper and healthy code switching, kind of from one extreme to another.
Right, but then you have the other layer where you have somebody who, I don't want to do that. I want to be able to, quote unquote, and this is, I think, where it gets unhealthy, is it's being reframed as authenticity. And so in order for me to be authentic, I should be able to say whatever I want. And you see this on social media all the time. You can go on X and you can see people just acting like savages to each other, hiding behind their keyboards and what have you. But if you call them on it, it's fine because they're being authentic. They're, quote unquote, standing up for what they believed in. So not only has it gone neutral, it has actually gone where that particular behavior is rewarded. And so the system gets more of what it rewards.
That's a really good point. I hadn't really pinned that one. I've looked at a lot of the layers, but okay, so the authentic self.
So while you think about that, I just want to tell people on the call too that if you guys have questions or comments, please, this is an interactive discussion. You don't have to just sit here and listen to us talk. But go ahead.
No, absolutely. So, okay. Going back to your comment on whether cluster B and or the dark triad are inability or lack of agency, right? Okay. There's the shadow. There's the call them the Jungian archetypes. I can get that one out. Carl Jung. All right. The good mother Gaia and the devouring mother. They both are built on the same kind of nurturing hardware, the same firmware, right? The same structures, but one. Right, exactly. Well, but also for the difference between the us ego is Gaia, and the I ego is the devouring mother. You're doing the nurturing, but it's not for us, it's for I. Now, the dark triad, like you think about some of those things. I use the example from the military. There's the special operations community has a higher percentage of dark triad men. Now, surrounding them is groupings of, I use the analogy in one of our chats. It's like you have large breed guardian dogs, which are big dogs who will rip out your throat, but they're good men who can do violence. And then you have the wolves that are integrated in that are bad men who can do violence, right? Or men who aren't, but in the special forces community, we know this. As men, we walk around and we're like, who's the wolf and who's the large breed guardian dog. And the large breed guardian dogs keep the wolves in check, but we also give them targets. We don't let them around our sheep, right? They don't touch our sheep. But over there, go savage, right? And they're incredibly well-honed weapons if you're careful with them, right? But there's a reason Leavenworth is a massive jail structure designed to house soldiers, because we end up pulling in a lot of people that need to be checked. There's a reason why the Uniform Code of Military Justice is less forgiving than the civilian justice system. As a captain in the Army, you have UCMJ rights. As a first lieutenant in the Marines, you have UCMJ authority. You can literally try somebody as their judge for certain offenses as a first lieutenant. That's a person with 3 years as an officer, right? And as a captain, you can run an Article 15 board. Now it gets bigger and bigger and bigger depending how it goes, but justice is very swift in the military, because you're dealing with large breed guardian dogs and wolves, and then the mix of everything in the middle. So there's that to consider in this one as well. So where I'm going with this one is the dark triad or the cluster B an inability? Is it a disability? Or is it just you've embraced the shadow, you've embraced the I ego over the us ego?
I think it goes back to something that we were talking about this morning in our ongoing discussion is it something that owns you? Is it your default state, or is it a discipline under constraint? Certainly, I talk about sometimes about tiered morality in the sense where, and this is something that I mentioned in our discussion, where I value honesty. I value that over deception for obvious reasons. However, I am perfectly willing to engage in deception in the pursuit of a top tier value, such as the defense of another. So the classic example is, well, would you have hidden Jews in an attic in World War II? Absolutely, and I would have lied to anybody and everybody. Does that violate my moral code about lying? No. So is it a dark triad or a bad personality trait? Is it bad? Maybe, but it is under constraint. It is a disciplined choice. Same thing for you. You are capable of violence in a specific context under constraint. Now, does that mean that you go running around killing people in your normal life here in the States? No, obviously not.
That you know.
One would hope. Because that beard would definitely, you'd get identified.
Yeah. No. Yeah, right. No, I grow it so I can cut it, and then I look like I'm 12. No, but that is a great point. And so something that came to mind on this one is, your draft article that you're going to be putting up about the tissue harvesting, and not to kind of tease on the preview of that one. I've had the what do you call it? The honor to have read the draft and kind of help you through some of the thoughts on that one, but about morality, about moral harm, whether internal or external. And, there's people who can do the tissue harvesting and just be absolutely fine with it. But to one of your points there, like, when is that not okay? But we have people with different capabilities of handling extreme I don't know, trauma is the wrong word, but trauma. It's that's opened my eyes to something I hadn't ever considered before. Um, in tissue harvesting, which is such a good thing writ large, many of us have benefited from tissue harvesting. But the reality of the situation is something that just happens over there, out of sight, out of mind. Don't tell me how it happens. Just let the surgeon zip me up before I ever know what happened. And if you want to know more, please read her forthcoming on that one. It's so fascinating. But okay, let me try to weave this back. I ego, us ego, shadow. So the shadow masculine is obviously the dark triad, the absent or tyrannical father. That's the dark triad versus the good king. The shadow feminine is the devouring mother versus the good mother Gaia. Both of those, one is the embrace of the us ego. There's something more to it. The shadow is always the I ego. What am I getting from this? How am I benefiting? And so again, it's a spectrum on that one. So there's different things like, I can conduct what appears to be the sociopathic killing of other people in the protection of my people, right? My enemies think I'm a crazy one, but then again, it's in that context. All right. So can you transition from the shadow into the good side? And I say yes. Fundamentally, that's the goal of a hero's journey for the men, is you actually have to die to the I ego and be reborn to the us ego, where you have gone, faced your own demons, brought back some form of a treasure, and provided that to the tribe. The heroine's journey is a little different. The heroine's journey is actually about redemption. So a great example of the heroine's journey is Encanto, the Disney movie. It took me a little bit to understand that one because it seemed a little weird, but Abuela, the grandmother, is the devouring mother. And in her attempt to control everything for what she wanted, she created fragility in the house, the magical house, and forced people into these things. Now, Mirabelle, the protagonist, goes around and redeems the different negative feminine archetypes that existed. So the beautiful sister, and let me jump into that one quick because I want to get this one right.
Having never seen that movie, you have just entered into I don't know what you're talking about land.
Oh no! All right, so let me just it's a great movie. If you I would love for you to watch it with the idea that it's not a hero's journey; it's actually the heroine's journey. So Abuela embodies the devouring mother, whose overprotectiveness stifles growth. She is stern and demanding to the point of suffocating her son Bruno, who speaks the truth about her behavior. Isabella represents the perfectionist maiden, constrained by expectations of flawlessness and trying to please everyone. Luisa symbolizes the overburdened caregiver whose identity is tied to her strength and utility. She can't ask for or accept help. And Peppa illustrates the emotional anima whose suppressed emotions manifest as uncontrollable weather. She's an empathetic, emotive feeler whose emotional elephant is always out of control of a rational rider. So those all four of those are shadow elements of the feminine, and Mirabelle actually helps redeem those relationships and pull them back into the light, partly by restructuring the relationships around them. So going back to your point, can you go from these behaviors that are, Isabella was classic histrionic, Luisa was how I categorize Luisa, but the point is you're able to redeem them back into from the I ego to the us ego and away from the cluster B.
Because you're putting constraints and context on them. You're putting limits,
constraints and context,
boundaries,
yep,
in when the behaviors are allowed.
But also removing artificial barriers that were constraining you, or artificial expectations that were constraining you in a different way.
Okay, talk more about that.
Okay, let's blend those two together with our neurodivergence, right? So on the one side, we need structure to guide us away from, the authentic self, right? The unfiltered authentic self, where we're saying to the us ego is to recognize that you have to have a filter to properly assimilate into social structures. On the other side, when you claim neurodivergence or you claim autism, you're setting yourself up to actually manifest the very behaviors that create identified as a pathology. You start to become too literal. You start to actually emulate it. So, we almost need to be like, no, that's not the right target to go after. Here's the structure to get to the right target.
I'm thinking about what you just said. Okay, keep going, because I'm still thinking. I don't want to just run my mouth to have something to say.
Okay, let me try to. I gave you the example of the dark feminine with Encanto.
Right.
So let me just kind of continue because this might help a little bit. Her path is not about defeating enemies, but healing divides within herself and her family to integrate the healthy feminine with the healthy masculine to create anti-fragility. As the movie unfolds, Mirabelle faces down the dark feminine traits and helps her relatives overcome and redeem the strength of the feminine goddesses. So Abuela, her confrontation with Mirabelle leads to a transformation into the nurturing great mother, fostering an environment where each family member can thrive. Isabella, through Mirabelle's encouragement, embraces her authentic self, transitioning into the creative maiden who values self-expression over protection. So that's almost a little bit of a contradiction for what we're talking about. The Luisa, Mirabelle helps her recognize the importance of vulnerability, allowing her to embody a balanced caregiver who acknowledges her own needs. And Peppa, by validating the feelings, Mirabelle aids her in achieving emotional equilibrium, transforming her into the wise woman who harnesses her emotions constructively. So,
okay, come out of the weeds and distill this down for, I would like to say the listeners, but for me, let's be real.
You're right. It's so structure. The structures that you're talking about are a very masculine tendency, chaos and order. The feminine in the archetypes is typically considered chaos, which is absolutely essential for creativity. You cannot create life without chaos. Creating life is chaos. Anybody who's had a baby has understood that the chaos that exists. You feel like your whole body is going to fall apart. So I'm told.
I was going to say, really?
So I've told. I've had a lot of conversations, in these topics with my wife on this one. But the masculine is always order. So so there's a phrase. It's Joseph Campbell. Okay, so there's actually a video that I love. So the lady describes women like water and men like a glass. The feminine water is described as very free flowing and beautiful. It can be calm and peaceful. It can be chaotic. And then the masculine is the structure, the safety, it's the certainty that holds the water. What I'm actually pushing back on the previous part of our conversation is we're approaching transitioning as putting up these structures, which is a very masculine tendency, around a chaotic system. Mirabelle embraces the chaos a little bit with the right structure to create the anti-fragile systems. All right, you got me down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, let's come out of the rabbit hole for a second. I want to put this post up because it's something that you and I have discussed, and I'm not looking to trash this person because initially when we had discussed doing this live, the goal was to say, we're not coming up to these women and saying, well, your late diagnosis of ADHD or autism or whatever, we're not telling you that you're lying pieces of trash. We're actually offering a more hopeful position that you can have a quirky personality, you can be quote unquote weird, and it doesn't have to be pathological, it doesn't have to be viewed as a disability, it doesn't have to be anything. You can just be weird. I'm weird. I own that I'm weird. And yet there are, what's that?
No, continue, sorry.
But your point in your more recent posts in our discussions is that if you get a diagnosis at 25, let's say, that you're a borderline personality, and then at 45 you're told, oh no, it's actually that it's autism, you're going to glom onto that because it sounds way better than, hey, if you have some behavioral issues, you make choices that harm yourself and the people around you. Also, if you guys can hear my livestock dogs out there, they're having a fit. There's probably something coming in, but they'll handle it, so sorry. But it sounds better, like I say, than, hey, because look at the symptoms or the criteria, for instance, for borderline personality. It's risky behavior, that it can be very harmful. It's black and white thinking, or this idea that my view of you as a human is based solely on our last interaction. So if you and I had an argument yesterday, I now hate you. But then if we have a good interaction, well, now I love you. And so there's no stability in the thinking.
Okay, so all right, so the bigger issue is cluster B, like you just described, are a poison, and our systems are long evolved to identify and protect us from them. We rightly identify the shadow. We rightly understand the toxicity of that. So the question here is, that quite a few people that we follow have been struggling with, is why does there seem to be such an explosion of cluster B? Well, and why is it so predominantly, obviously, within women? And it goes back to an article that I recently wrote on the patriarchy. I've got one I'm finishing up on the matriarchy. And the interesting thing about both is they're actually designed to kind of constrain that negative shadow. Those are the structures. They're actually, they behave very differently. One is very structured. The other is more like the movie Encanto. It's actually much more subtle, much more covert than overt enforcement, let's just say. The masculine patriarchy is overt. The feminine matriarchy is covert. They're designed to temper in the shadow, the dark triad, and the cluster B, respectively. They're trying to direct those energies because those energies aren't necessarily bad. The natural nurturing and care and compassion and empathy of the devouring mother is something that needs to be put towards something productive. And the drive and the dedication and even the camaraderie, right, that just go get it of the dark triad can also be redirected to something good. We talked about that a little bit with the military. We put them to very effective use. What's in the middle here, though, is maturity. And this is where you and I will disagree on this one. I don't think our incarnation in this mortal coil is our only run at the windmill, if you will. I think we're all here. We're talking the ability, yeah, sure. Simulation theory, reincarnation, journey of souls, however you want to call it. I believe we have more than one attempt here, and I believe the entire reason that we exist here is to mature. With that in mind, that really helps me understand personally that there are less mature souls. And I think what we're seeing is a less mature soul who hasn't understood how to integrate themselves, the feminine and the masculine, in a proper yin and yang together, are having difficulty reconciling that. And so, in the cluster B, it's largely chaos. So where do they want to go? They don't want all this chaos. They're going to go somewhere where that chaos can be excused. I'm autistic. I can be my authentic self. I don't have a filter. I don't have to do the work of actually soul maturation. And I think that's because entropy is easy. It's really, really freaking hard to overcome entropy. We know this just from physical fitness, healthy living, whatever it is. It takes a lot of effort to be healthy. It doesn't take a lot of effort to do the opposite, right? Entropy is a bitch, though, and it will make your life suck. So entropy is easy. So creating the systems that actually mature the soul are going to take effort. And the easy button is to just embrace an excuse.
Okay. Now explain that from the position of, no, we do only get one bite at the apple, so to speak. And I don't know, if I were to, it's like I agree with your conclusion, but not necessarily the method that you used to get there, right? Obviously, I believe we only get one shot.
Yeah. Well, let's just take the one shot. That's fine. It does, I don't even need to debate the others. The idea, and I think we may have talked about this before, but the root of the word Torah, the Old Testament, is an archery term for aiming to a proper mark. So it takes precision, it takes accuracy. You have to be able to build this capability. The Torah is also the commandments, the mitzvah, are instructions in righteousness. They aren't this box. They were kind of like, okay, guide rails to kind of help you get to the right position at the right point towards that target, right? They were those guiding principles. And the goal is, it doesn't matter where you start. Are you aiming at the right target? Are you maturing towards something better? So it doesn't matter where you started, for, whether you're an immature soul or a mature soul or whatever. Most of us, we're here because we're still here to learn something.
Let's look at it in a neutral way as maturing is the GPS route that you're following, right? But trauma is kind of like this side trip that you're forced to do, or it's a flat tire, or it's something that happens that gets you off of the maturation blue line, so to speak. Now, you can do one of two things. You can do what is necessary to find your way back to a maturity path, or you can just go frolic in the woods and claim, well, I meant to be here anyway. Does that make sense?
I wish they would crawl off into the woods, because then they'd leave us alone on social media.
Well, to be fair, you are a A-level troll, so there is some you gotta own that part of it.
Yeah.
You are.
Maybe that's what I'm here. Maybe dragon poker is right. Maybe that's what my maturation is learning to let it be. But so this is where it goes back. Entropy is easy.
I think that's my point.
I agree. I
says that they have this issue, or they have, okay, let's even pretend that it's true that you are quote unquote autistic. Let's pretend that every single person out there who is claiming, late diagnosed autism is actually on the spectrum. Let's pretend. Were they born that way? Was it trauma caused? Was it what is happening? And why was it misdiagnosed, quote unquote, misdiagnosed as cluster B? I would argue that the behaviors associated with what is now being called autism matched those of a cluster B, which means you were acting like a cluster B.
Now you get me asking, cluster B. Is cluster B
not societally desirable? Does that make sense? So you are acting in such a way that is socially undesirable, and we have labels for that type of behavior. But if you wait long enough and you shop enough, or you get into the field yourself, then you can create other labels. Oh, actually, it's not that it's socially undesirable behavior. It's that I can't help myself.
Pin something down here. Cluster B and Dark Triad are behavioral. Mm-hmm. You don't get medicated for those.
Whoa.
Or
what do you mean you don't get medicated for them? Sure you
do. You?
Depending on the thing.
Okay. Well, okay, autism is not something you can get medicated for.
I don't know.
ADHD you do, but that's an amphetamine. Sorry, where I'm going with this one is...
I was wondering.
Okay, so this is where I don't think there's a binary on this one. I don't think we're going to have a good answer. I think there are some people who have a genetic and or indoctrinal behavioral system, trauma, whatever, that drives them towards things we would call cluster B and or dark triad. I also think there is an absolutely behavioral element of that one as well. I mean, having 3 children, I can tell you that they don't have the physical proclivity for it, but we are working to mature them away from the narcissistic and the histrionic and the antisocial and things like that. We have these conversations regularly about maturing their personality from I to us, growing up and maturing, going back to the healthy form of masking, learning that there is more than just you, and you don't have to. You have control. You have agency over yourself. So for some people, that maturation might be harder. For some people, that maturation might be easier. But I believe where you were going with this, and what I agree with, is we have the agency to take the actions to address those behaviors. The problem is entropy is easy. If I don't want to do that work, I can put on a different mask which says I'm autistic. And now I'm forgiven for this, and I can just lean into all of these quirks. And not only is it explained though, but because we call it neurodiversity, and we call it there's a lot of monetary incentives around this as well. I have a disability, and disabilities are now celebrated because you get accommodations, you get off work, you get special status, you get all these other things that come with it that were designed to help people who truly needed it, but are now used and abused by people who don't need it. You brought up earlier this week the autism centers in Minnesota and the fraud that goes with that. It was too easy. It was too much money flowing that way. That was just too much of a suck, and so they make the claim. Now, what you see there, those are antisocial, right, behaviors, taking advantage of a social safety net that is designed to help people who actually need the help, but it's being exploited by people who have an I ego, not an us ego.
I want to throw a wrinkle in what we were just talking about with, for instance, borderline personality. That's what I was just typing here. There's actually a broad review called the Lifetime Course of Borderline Personality Disorder. So we talked earlier about the behavioral traits that you would find in borderlines. Impulsive, dangerous behaviors such as self-harm, suicidality, substance misuse, reckless behavior. That improves, as in the symptoms tend to lessen the older the person gets. So someone who can be absolutely diagnosed, for instance, as a borderline personality at 22 may not meet the criteria anymore at 45 or 55.
That makes sense based on just life maturation.
Exactly. But
right?
It also says that affective symptoms, including anger, abandonment, sensitivity, emotional instability, were more persistent. So you might not engage in trauma recreation type promiscuity or other sexually risky behavior or what have you at 45, but you might still be emotionally unstable or very invested in an identity protective system because you haven't handled what puts you there. Hopefully I'm communicating well. It makes more sense.
No, it does. And so you deal with a lot of counseling, trauma counseling, and things like that. You've had your own, I've listened to the podcast that you had with Kyle Shepard, and your own desire. I mean, you've lived it. You've gone through the identity protective systems where, it was so important to you, and you've matured out of it. So there's, and again, I even look back, in my own emotional and I would say, emotional maturation over the years, learning all these things. Like, I am absolutely not the same person I was 20 years ago. That's for certain.
Some would hope, right?
I would hope not. But this is where I have to just kind of wrap, because I do have to wrap this in just a couple of minutes, though I could go on for hours. Okay, it's the maturation. There is a positive and a negative instantiation of the masculine and the feminine. One's driven by the I ego, the other is driven by the us ego. The whole point of a hero's journey is that we are to die to that I ego, be reborn into the us ego, and mature. The same thing for the heroine's journey. It's an I to an us, and it's the redemption. It's slightly different, but still incredibly important to understand. The key here is it's that maturation. What I think we're seeing, and underneath that, you've got all different flavors of people. So you've got things like physical disability, like your ADHD, or I'm not. I could even argue that one, but let's just say autism. Very clearly, level 2 and level 3 autism is a actual disability that limits creates challenges. Down syndrome is another one that is very obviously clear. The rest of it, kind of, there's those spectrumal things. But in the core traits of that shadow, the cluster B, that naturally manifests in children, and we grow and mature them out of that. We're going through that maturation from the I ego to the us ego, and I think some people mature faster, some people resist maturation, and some people use the ability to claim diversity as an excuse for the hard work of maturation, are claiming neurodivergency as a mask to cover their resistance to that maturation. Yeah.
So I will leave you with this, and maybe this can be a springboard for another live at some point. There is no truer form of I ego than a toddler. That is literally what we are trying to raise them to not be, right? That's why they call it the terrible twos, because they are all in on the I ego. Everything is mine, everything is no, everything is, are you kidding me? He used to be so sweet, and now he's like a demon. We train them to not think that way. But if you look at some of these folks, they are still toddlers, emotionally
100%.
speaking. And so maybe one of the contributing factors is a lack of raising.
Well, 100%, and that goes back to the maturation. This is the challenge of the devouring mother. The devouring mother, the good mother. So this is chicken or the egg on this one as well. The good mother actually holds that line. My wife does a great job, and she is mean, right? Because she holds the line, demands that they have that accountability. We have these corrective measures that we put in place all the time. We have the structure. We understand that they can't just go do these things. We don't just overindulge them or over validate, right? We challenge them. They can do hard things. We make them do hard things. We make them go through these things. But a devouring mother, because it's the I ego for herself, she wants her kid to be her friend. She doesn't want to be the mean mother, right? But you know what? Gaia, nature, she's a bitch. She will destroy you. At the same time, she will create you. But if you embrace that, you become anti-fragile. That's the Gaia is not the good mother is not the perversion of the good mother versus the devouring mother. Is the devouring mother is your overly what's the proper term I'm thinking of? Did you say indulging? Yes, you're overindulging. You're just smothering. You're smothering with almost too much. It's the compassion that smothers and devours. It's not meanness necessarily. It's actually that I ego of wanting to be fed. You don't ever want to go do that. So that creates its own cycle in there where the children are never challenged to actually do the maturation that needs to happen because the mother was never challenged to do the maturation she needs to happen, which is perversely why families children that are raised by a single mother have significantly worse outcomes than families that are raised by a single father. It's the weirdest of the weird. You would think that the natural nurturing mother would do the best. Actually, the father who does better than the single mother, because the women tend to tip towards that devouring side.
Because you can have the structure or you can have the nurturing, but you can't fully inhabit both.
Correct. And the nurturing isn't actually obviously the structure in a large way actually matters more than the nurturing is there to soften the structure, but nurturing without the structure is chaos. Now structure without the nurture can be fragile as well. We can get into that one. I can go for days on the negative masculine, but going back, kind of wrapping this all together, we're talking about maturation. We're talking about avoiding the shadow. We're talking about I to us. We're talking about the ease of masking as neurodivergent is that you can actually avoid the challenge of doing the hard work of this yourself, which involves, as you found, you can't, you're going to fail if you try to do it yourself. How do you surround yourself with the right people who can challenge you, grow you, and how do you allow yourself to be vulnerable in that sense to be challenged?
You embrace healthy embarrassment.
Correct.
I think we'll leave it there. I know you got to go back to work. I got to let
Yep.
my dog out. But hey, thank you for this. This was super
Yep.
fun, as always. I will talk to you later. Thanks everybody for joining.
So many layers, guys. I apologize. We got stuck down a few rabbit holes, but there's just so many different considerations on here. So it's what I really appreciate about the conversations is it lets me get out of my own head a little bit. I'm an oral thinker, so sometimes it's just grappling with these problems, weaving them around and getting them challenged and trying to make them fit helps. But it's still none of this. If anybody comes at you with an easy answer, they're probably.
Yeah, for real. Well, hey everybody, have an awesome day.
All right, thanks.